Hi guys, welcome back to another setup tutorial video. This week the Class A series is moved to Interlagos. Interesting track, obviously quite a contrast to Watkins Glen. Because obviously Watkins very high speed circuit. Interlagos obviously a couple of very tight corners and need a lot of low speed traction. Front limited track from Watkins, where this will be rear limited, so yeah, very contrasting, and quite a good track to actually talk about the next item on our sort of like setup guide, and that's the damping. We sort of touched on damping very lightly earlier on in some of the previous videos, just more passing really in conjunction with sort of like the heaves and a little bit of the aero balance. So I just obviously want to give you a breakdown of exactly what does what. Now the iRacing descriptions are yeah, they're okay. Um, Okay, no, I'm reading them because I just don't even read them actually, and they're not okay. They really give you no information whatsoever on what they does. So let's just try and break this down now, so you know exactly what you're doing and where you're doing, and you can go straight to the dampers and do some fine tuning and just try and get this car to perform. So now, if you don't know the difference between the low speed and the high speed, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's not self-explanatory. It's pretty straightforward. Low speed damping is effectively what is that controls how the car transitions in and out of a corner. And by transition, what that means is like the more oversteer, the more understeer you will have coming in or out of a corner, where the car's going to rotate more off the corner or it's going to understeer, wide or something like that. Um, where the high speed damping or the high speed dampers is all about how the car handles bumps and curbs. Um, I will link a video that talks about dampers in the description to this one. It's a great video and it's absolutely worth a watch as well, because it goes into a little bit more detail and you see it on a real car and stuff like that. But yeah, it's very useful, and yeah, one obviously I caught my attention when I was sort of researching the information. So um, now, if you're the obvious thing is if you're having problems with a curb, the car's not settling down coming off of a curb very well, or it's causing some instability or a bump or something like that, then you're looking at your high-speed dampers. So there's no point in changing anything to do with the low speed. That's not going to make any difference whatsoever. Yeah, it's the high speed that you're looking at. So you go straight to your high speed settings. Now, if it's how the car transitions into the corner, you've got too much oversteer, for example, going into the corner, then that's going to be your low speed dampers that you need to work with. Right, okay, so let's break it down into the different areas then. Obviously, we've got a massive amount of dampers here. It can be a bit daunting. Sometimes you um, just get the corners, and it was only obviously bump and rebound on the old one as well. It would become quite simple to configure. This is full on in your face with the amount of stuff that you've got here. So we'll start with the front heave, and as I sort of spoke about in the aero video, so we're just going to talk about low speed for the moment. The the softer the damping, or the less damping you have, that will mean that the car will the ride height as you brake, for example, on the compression, it will mean that the nose of the car will sit down quicker because it's just not being dampened, and so it'll move a bit more freer and it'll just drop to the sort of its point. So if you find that you're just bombing out a little bit into the braking zones, then the heave damper will be quite a good one to sort of increase up, because that will stop that from bottoming out. Now, if the car's not turning, and the initial part of the of your sort of your turn in process, you know, when you've just got a little bit of lock on kind of thing, that very initial bit, and it could be that you just need to free up the heave damper a bit to allow that front end to dip a little bit more, just to get a tiny bit more rotation, because with the aero balance in there. So yeah, so the key thing is, if you've got on very initial turning, if you've got too much turn, yeah, you want to go up on the damper. If you've got not enough on the very initial part, then you go down. And of course, if you're bottoming out the car, then you'll need to make it stiffer. So you need to sort of fine tune that. So you might want a bit of extra turn, but you can't have that, because obviously it starts the car to bottoming out, and then you will actually understeer more. So if you go down and you think, oh well, actually I just made my car understeer, go and check that out. Make sure it's not bottoming out now, it's not hitting that 10mm plank, or on other cars if it's just not bottoming out on the ground. And yeah, that will give you instant understeer, so that will make sense why. So sometimes you might actually already have understeer because it's bottoming out, and actually going up will make the car turn more, and you think, oh god, I didn't want it to turn anymore. What you'll then have to do is go up even further again to stop that from rotating. Now, the low speed, like I said, low speed damping is all about how the car compression damping is all about how the car transitions in the corner. So a lower number in theory should get you to turn more, higher number turn less, but that really does depend on the on whether or not the car's bottoming out or not under braking. Now, the low speed rebound damping, the way this works is completely the opposite way around. So a lower number, what that means is that, again, it means less damping. So what you have to think of the car is when you're under acceleration, the car wants to squat at the back end, and then that will pop the front end up. Now if you have more rebound damping, of course it's rebound because the car's coming back up, what that will mean is that if you have more, it will try and keep the front end of the car down. It will take longer to transition up to that point, and a higher number will actually make the car rotate more off of the corner. Now with the heave spring, with the heave damper as well, that's the very last part of the corner as well, more to where the point of the car is almost getting to where it's almost in a straight line, so that very last little bit. So if you find that the car rotates off initially okay and then starts to go wide, it's because you need to put a little bit more rebound damping in there. And then the opposite way around, if you find that it's snapping right at the very last minute, then you can come down on the rebound. Hope that makes some sense there on that. So with the front damping, what we're looking at again is exactly the same. So low speed compression, a lower number will make the car turn more, but with the corners, it's much more when the car is transitioning from that initial sort of, like sort of 10 degrees, 15 degrees of steering lock to actually sort of really getting it into the corner. So the second phase, when you're really trying to go for the apex, that's where these dampers come in. Again, a lower number here will mean that the car will turn more. So if you're if initially it's turning in and then it's sort of like it just fails to hit the apex, then you can change the damping here. You can go down the damping, and then it will carry on rotating into the corner. It's the same principle though. If the car bottoms out all of a sudden halfway through the entry phase of the corner, then it will scrub wide. So you need to keep an eye on that, and you can use the Motec data to see whether or not you're hitting the minimum ride heights. Like I say, you'll know that on your car, on the McLaren, it's 10mm. And you'll need to go up on that particular on here. So say for example turn 3 in Interlagos, turn 4 I think it actually is classed. That's quite a common one, because heavy braking zone. It might be that initially it turns in fine, you've got that set right, but then it just sort of just understeers in that little middle bit. But if you go and check the ride height, it might be that the right hand front tire, front suspension, that's very, very low, like under 10mm, so you're probably actually touching the plank under the car then, which is causing a little bit of understeer. So again, you can with the low speed compression, you can try and sort that out, so stiffen it up a little bit, and that will stop it bottoming out. If it's not bottoming out at all, but it's still understeering, then what you do is you'll go down on it. So down will give you more mid corner to the apex. Yeah, we're only talking to the apex point. That will give you more turn, and a higher number will take some of the turn off. So if it's oversteering, if it's just got too much turn, and you just want to dial that back a little bit, and you can tell it's the front end sort of like snapping in kind of thing, getting in too quickly, and which is like causing the rear to sort of be dragged behind kind of thing, then you would go up. So up will give you more understeer, down will give you more understeer, down will give you more oversteer, more rotation, however you want to word it, but keep an eye out for the car bottoming out. Always got to keep an eye out for the car bottoming out. That makes a huge difference to what you're doing. So you could be clicking and go, oh, I'm not getting any more turn, and that's why. And then you can go the other way and go, Alex, you're lying to me. I've got more turn going up, and that's just because you're not bottoming out now. So yeah, be mindful of that. Check the Motec data. The rebound, low speed rebound, again, that's exactly the same as what it is on the heave. The more the rebound, the more it will keep that side of the car down on the ground. So going through a left-hander, this side of the car is going to be like really pushed into the ground, and that will keep the front end down if you've got more damping, and that will give it more turn coming off the corner. So if you're pushing coming off the corner, then you go up on the rebound, but if you've got way too much turn coming off the corner, then you'll go down on the rebound. Again, keep an eye on the you're not going to bottom out or anything like that, so it's not so much of a worry, because this is all about the car popping up more than anything. Moving to the rear of the car, these are like completely opposite to the way the front end works, for example. So low speed compression damping here. Now, so remember me saying you got to think of the car as a bit like a seesaw. Obviously, when you when you brake, the front goes down, but when you accelerate, it pops back up again. Well, of course, when you're doing that, the rear is obviously doing the exact opposite thing. So when you brake, the back pops up in the air, and when you accelerate, the back drops down. It squats into the tarmac, and this is where the compression kicks in. So this low speed compression damping affects how the car exits a corner. So again, on the corners, we're looking at the initial part, so from the very apex of the corner sort of out towards when you start to bleed off the steering lock. This is where these come into play. So if you've got just a bit of wheel spin or something like that, or the car's rotating too much as you get onto the gas, then what you'd need to do is you'll want the car to squat more at the back end, so that it just digs into the tarmac more, and that would be a lower compression setting. So down will do that. Now, if the car, for example, has got understeer coming off the initial part of the corner, straight away it starts to push wide. You're like, for God's sake, I'm not going to make this exit at all. Yeah, then what you would do is you'd actually go up on the damping, because that will make it squat less, and actually the car will sort of scrub across the. You're more likely to get a bit of extra rotation coming off. It's not wheel spin or anything like that, but it's just the car will want to move because it's not digging into the ground as much. It will want to rotate more off of the corner when you initially apply the gas. So definitely have a good play with these settings. These can make quite a difference to lap times as well. So the low speed really is my sort of go-to setting when I start working on dampers. I'll look at unless I know I've got a huge problem with a bump earlier on in a setup build process, I wouldn't have touched the high speed yet. We'll talk about the high speed in a moment, but that's the only reason I would have gone to it any earlier. Now, of course, with the compression damping affecting how the car accelerates out of the corner, the rebound damping is how the car goes into a corner. Because what's basically happening is that as we hit the brakes, the front end dips down, but the back end pops up. So if we have a really soft it's not soft, it's if we have less damping, so it means that it moves up and down faster, or it's freer is the right word, then what will happen is you hit the brakes on like a 0 setting here. There'll be nothing restricting the back end. There'll be no damping restricting the back end. Keep trying to keep it down, for example. So it just pops straight up. And what that does is that will help the front end dig in to the ground, so that you'll have more grip from the front tyres, but obviously less grip on the rear tyres, so you'll get more rotation. And again, this is more towards, after the initial part of the turn in, so because that's controlled by the heave, where the car's in a straight line. It's much more controlled by heave. Now we're really talking about going into the corner. So if you start to oversteer sort of in the second phase of the corner, when you're more towards the middle, for example, just before you get on the gas again, kind of thing, it's all very free. Then what you'd do is you would go up on the heave, on the rebound damping here, to like a 10 would basically would try and keep the rear end from popping up, giving you less rotation. Of course, you've got two pieces of damping that can control that. You've got the front one with the compression, and you've got the rear one. So you've got quite a lot of control. If you had a car that was massively oversteery, for example, then what you do is you go to 10 on the compression damping on the front, and you go to a 10 on the low speed rebound damping on the rear as well. So the front end wouldn't want to dip in, and the rear end wouldn't want to pop up. We're really trying to keep that car under control. Of course, the opposite is true. If it's not turning enough and you've got massive amounts of understeer, well, lower the low speed damping, and lower the rebound. Let that rear end really pop up and the front end really drop down. Again, keep an eye on that front end. Make sure it's not bottoming out. That's the key thing there. With the heave, once we started to come out of the corner, and our sort of compression damping here is sort of done its thing. It's got its initial rotation off the corner. Just as you're really starting to straighten up the wheel again, if it gets a bit snappy on exit, then we're looking at the low speed compression damping. So that will make a big difference. That's much more when the car is in a straight line and not rocking to one side. That's really where these come into effect, but more here when we're really starting to straighten out the car. A good example of this would be say coming out of the downhill left-hander. You find that going through the middle of the corner you can be okay, and then all of a sudden you lose it coming here, and that's just because your compression damping just might be out just a tiny little bit. It's worth pointing out there is a bump down there as well, and you can see that in the Motec data, and that's where high speed comes into. And low speed rear damping, exactly the same. If if you need more rotation going into a corner, then the initial part going into it, then reduce the amount of damping. That will allow the rear end to really pop up again. And if you've got too much, then just stiffen that up. Right, moving on to the high speed damping and exactly what that does. This is much more kind of like how you would understand exactly how it would work. So the high speed compression damping on the front heave and the rear heave to a point as well, or both exactly the same. So they do exactly the same thing. So if you hit a bump, for example, and you've got so much damping that the suspension doesn't give, that it sort of it hits the bump and the car sort of takes off. You actually you get a bit of air kind of thing. There's two ways of looking at that. What you need to figure out is whether or not that when you've left the air, if there's still damp compression going on, so that that's what's giving you the flight effectively. What you will need to do is you'll need to soften it up so that it can actually ride the bump a little bit more. Now, really, the high speed stuff is going to be a lot of trial and error, a lot of clicking and adjusting. Now, I am not an expert at you looking at Motec and the damping histograms and things like that, and for damper velocities. And there is a really good way of setting up your dampers based on Motec data. But it's a hole in my knowledge that I still need to fill. And right now, I don't need to fill it because I will spend the time experimenting until I get the right settings, kind of thing. It's a bit time consuming, but you get there as well. You get comfortable. Now, of course, if you hit a curb, and instantly the suspension whacks, it reaches the point where it can't go any further. It just smacks the car and it bottoms out and all sorts of stuff. Then you know that you've got to stiffen up the damping. That will keep the movement in the suspension. You don't want it to hit its maximum point really, really quickly because you haven't got enough damping in there. With the rebound damping, now what you got to think of that is completely the opposite way around. So that's as the car once you've gone over a bump, it's as the suspension is dropping back down to the ground. Now, how quickly does it drop back down to the ground? Now, if you go over a curb, for example, and you've got too much damping on your rebound, what will happen is that wheel will stay up in the air a little bit long, and it won't drop back down with the other side of the curb in, for example, or bump or whatever it is like that. It will linger in the air a little bit, and then the car will sort of drop and hit the ground. And then, of course, what happens then is that the damping comes into play again, and of course the car can start to bounce a little bit. You want to avoid the bouncing as much as possible because you can't get the power on while the car's bouncing around. So in that case, what you might need to do is just free up the damping there. So go to, say, like a 0 setting. That will release that wheel a lot quicker, so it will drop back down. It'll follow the contours of the track or the curbing or whatnot like that. Now, if it's not doing that, if it's coming down too quickly, then what will happen is you kind of like, it's almost like hitting the top of the bump or the curb or something like that. It's trying to transition down. So that's quite rare in its own sake. I wouldn't say always run it at 0 or always run it at 10 or anything like that. You really have got to have a play with it. But you'll feel the difference. It might be that you just want the car just to react in a certain way. So over the bumps, and that a really good example of where you would have a lower heave spring going through Phillip Island, turn 2. You follow that long left-hander. You follow the curb in around there, and there's like a bump in the middle of that. And with a higher damper setting, for example, you'll notice that the car will bounce, because when you hit that curb, it'll start to bounce. Sort of the front end, that is. And a lower heave there will mean that it's not a huge bump. The tyre can follow that bump up and down, but you just have to free up the heave rebound damper, and that will allow it, because it's pretty much all 4 wheels going over that bump at the same time. That will allow the rebound damper, or the wheel, to follow the bump up and down, and it smooths out that much more, and that will allow you to attack that corner more and get on the power earlier and carry more speed off of the corner. It's exactly the same on the corner springs as it is as the heaves and how they operate. Now, the only difference is, of course, you might run asymmetrical damping, and there's no reason why you shouldn't run asymmetrical damping, actually, and it's something a lot of people don't do. If, say, for example, you've got a problem in just like one particular corner, I'll just randomly put this out there and say, like, and go Zolder. You know how it's got that massive curb on that it's first chicane. Yeah, really, the wheels that are hitting this are the right-hand wheels. You're not hitting it anywhere else. Oh, you shouldn't be hitting it on the left-hand side, because then you're launching it over the top. And so there's no harm in adjusting the damping, the high-speed damping, and the rebound on the front right and the rear right to work solely for that particular curb, and then adjust the left-hand side for other corners that you might have problems with. It might be, for example, that the left-hand one, your problem is the final chicane going into the final corner, you take a bit much curb there, so that needs some different adjusting. So don't be shy in having these settings different left to right. I don't do it enough. It takes a lot of time to really work on these dampers, but there is no reason why you shouldn't have them different. So if anyone tells you, oh no, you must run them the same, it'll make the car rock and handle funny and all that sort of stuff. It's not true. Um, when one side of the car is hitting something, the important thing to do is to get that stabilized as quickly as possible. This side's okay, this side hasn't gone over a bump, it's perfectly stable. But what this side is doing, because it's unstable and it's bouncing away, it's affecting this side. So the sooner you can get this sorted, the less this is going to have to do as well. And that's really where inert mass comes into play as well. So yeah, we'll move on from high speed damping and rebound. They work exactly the same way on all four corners and the front and back heave. So lots of testing with those need to be done. Like I say, don't be afraid to do that. But to talk about the inert mass, what the inert mass does is it's basically a weight inside the damper, and instead of the shaft in the damper being smooth, it's actually threaded, and this weight moves up and down with the damper, with the sort of the contraction and pulling back apart again, as you go over bumps. But specifically, it has an effect on how one side of the car's suspension and rocking affects the other side of the car. Specifically with bouncing, and oscillation in the tires. When you see the super slow motion F1 videos where the tire carcass is vibrating at like crazy speeds, but they slow it down so you can see it like shaking all over the place, and it's like a floppy mess kind of thing. Well, what that does is those vibrations go all the way through the car and out the other, basically to the other wheel and to the other tire, and that affects the grip on that car and that tyre as well. Now, if you notice, the tyre that's always vibrating like mad is the unloaded tyre. Usually it's the loaded one is fairly solid, not really doing too much, but the vibration of that unloaded tyre, the oscillation going all the way through the suspension, through the torsion bars, through the heave, and to the other tyre, actually causes a bit of vibration as well, and it actually gives up a little bit of grip. And what we can do is with this inert mass, with the weight, we can dampen down that oscillation. So what you're trying to do is kind of like you see it in buildings like high skyscrapers, for example. They have actually like a weight in the building that as it gets blown in the wind, because they rock in the wind, there's a big weight in the middle that actually rocks with it, and that's to dampen out the wind effect, basically, so that as it moves to the right, then the weight sort of goes to the left, kind of thing, and it sort of keeps it straight without it sort of going nuts with the wind, kind of thing, back and forth, go crazy and fall down. And this is exactly the same kind of thing here. It's all about minimizing the oscillation on the other side of the car so that it gets back into control. Now, there is no one perfect setting with this. What you'll have is you might have corners that respond really well, like coming out as you go over a curb or something like that. It might respond really well to have it on like a particular setting, and you can find time there, but what you'll do is you'll lose some time elsewhere. And inert mass really is it's a very tricky setting to get right. There is some bits that you can look on Motec, and if you go onto the FW31 forum, there's some Motec data files there that you can look at and understand. The thread is massive and it's very, very confusing, but really the easiest way to dial this setting in is to I think it was Mogger from Radicals, when I was sort of up and coming. He described it the best way. Yeah, and you got to think of it like an old AM style radio, like old with a dial. Yeah, and you kind of, you know what it's like, you kind of you've got the main dial and then you've got like a fine tune. So what you do is you just scroll to roughly where you think is the ideal spot till you get a good vibe. You know, and what I tend to do, for example, is I'll start off on 0 0 and I'll go, right, let's go 5 kilograms on the front. How does that feel? Yeah, okay, I found a little bit of time. Woohoo, great. Yeah, if you didn't find anything, don't worry about it. Go again, another 5. Yeah, go to 10. And it's like, yeah, I've still not found anything. It's not really helping me in any places. You'll know when you get it dialed in right, because you'll start to find time. And this has got to be dialed in for you as well, because you'll be driving different lines. You'll be putting the car under different loads against different drivers. So no one setting is going to be perfect for every single driver out there. And you'll go again, and so say for example you find a bit of time on 15 kilograms, and then what you do is you go to 20 and you lose that bit of time again. Yeah, now you obviously have to do enough testing to know that it's just not like a random one lap or something like that you've nailed. And then if you go another further one and you go even further back and you're back to where you started, kind of thing, then you go back to that sort of 15 kilogram mark. And then what you need to do is you need to try like 16 and 17. See if you gain any more time overall. If you do, great, then you settle on the one. You go all the way up to like 20 until you get to the perfect one, because it might be that 19 is the perfect setting where you gain the most amount of time. It might be 17, and then you settle on 17. If that's not right, if you gain nothing from going 16, 17, 18, 19, then what you do is you go, 14, 13 until you find the one that gives you a bit of extra time. If nothing gives you extra time, then boom, you're on 15. That's your one. That's your setting. And on the rear, you go and you do exactly the same. Doesn't matter if you do the rear or the front first, but that's how you dial in the inert mass. There's a lot of laps involved in setting that up. And I'm sure if you were an engineer and you knew exactly what you're doing with the Motec, you could figure it out much quicker. But I tell you what, there's nothing like dialing it in just right for you and seeing that little bit of seeing those lap times improve. A good inert mass setting is believed to be as much as 0.2 of a second a lap. So while it might be one of the last things that you tweak on your setup, and it should be one of the last things you tweak on the setup, by the way, because if you were to suddenly go and change suspension, then it's going to vibrate at a totally different frequency, and you're going to need different inert mass. So keep that till last. There could be as much as 0.2. It might only be half a tenth. It might be a tenth or something like that. But getting the setting right will give you time, and it's a very overlooked setting. And it really should be like a 9th hour thing. Once you're settled on your set, you're happy with everything, then you're right, okay, right, I'm going to do a bunch of laps and just work on that. Right, guys, that's everything. I hope it made sense. I hope it wasn't too long. There's nothing really more I could say about the dampers. So this is gone. I've done this one for our academy guys as well as the community ones, because it's all self-explanatory. There's no more information I can give, or less information that I can give on the dampers. They are what they are. And it's a very valuable tool to sort of fine tune your setup. I leave it towards the end. I will work on my suspension and aero and all that sort of stuff first, and dampers becomes one of the last things. There might be a couple of other little bits, like I say, the inert mass and maybe some diff tweaks or something like that. But at this point, you really need to have all the other stuff sorted out. Right, and talking about all the other stuff, the last few little tweaks that we can do, well, we'll do those. We'll do that video hopefully in the next in the next few weeks. I want to get all of these done by week 12. So hope you found this video useful. Give me a thumbs up, all that kind of goodness, if it has. If you've got any questions, then just post them on the YouTube comment section or on the forum. You know, I'm happy to answer any questions or anything like that you've got. You know, these videos are here to help you. And if you think I've missed something out, you want to ask some questions, then just go ahead and ask. You know, I'm doing them because I want to help. No other reason. So, all right, guys. Yep. Have a good luck and whatnot in Interlagos. I'll be sharing the community set with that. It's Monday night now. I'm just about to go and do that. And we'll go from there.